Welcome. Today we're diving deep, maybe into a modern-day version of that old story,
Mhm.
the emperor's new clothes,
Yeah.
where what you see isn't always what you get.
Exactly. Appearances versus reality.
Right. We're looking at the pernicious spectacle of Trump's Russia-Ukraine diplomacy by Michael Kimmage. This was published in August 2025.
Hmm.
And it really digs into how sometimes high-stakes diplomacy can look, well, more like a show than actual statesmanship.
The performance.
Whether you call it strategy or spectacle, Kimmage argues it's definitely a show. And if you appreciate this kind of sharp insight, well, we hope you'll subscribe and maybe share this deep dive.
And speaking of shows worth following, this podcast. If you like a mix of sharp insight with maybe a touch of sarcasm, hit subscribe, spread the word, and come back for more.
Absolutely.
But yeah, our mission today is really to unpack Kimmage's main point. He argues that all these demands for quick fixes in the Russia-Ukraine war, especially when they're driven by this sort of performative style, they might actually be getting in the way of a real lasting peace.
So slowing things down instead of speeding them up.
Potentially, yeah. And we want to explore what that means for American power, for international relations, looking beyond the headlines.
And as always, we're just laying out Kimmage's analysis here. Our goal is to convey his ideas impartially, not push any particular view, just helping you understand the source material.
Exactly. Let's get into it.
So Kimmage doesn't beat around the bush. He kicks off right away with that Anderson fable comparison. He paints Trump's approach to the Ukraine war as, well, like the emperor parading in those invisible clothes.
It's a really strong image to start with.
It is. It immediately suggests, maybe there's more show than substance going on here.
And Kimmage describes how Trump positions himself as the fulcrum, right? The absolute center point for ending the war.
He's the guy?
He's the guy. Remember, resolve it in 24 hours, promise.
Yeah.
And Kimmage notes we've seen Putin, Zelensky, European leaders all making the trip to the U.S.
Right. The message seems clear.
The message, Kimmage says, is that peace gets forged by him in the White House. Not Kiev, not Moscow, not Geneva.
Only there. So he's the indispensable figure. But, okay, sticking with the metaphor, what about the clothes? Is there an actual strategy underneath all this?
Well, that's Kimmage's core point. He argues pretty forcefully that Trump has no plan for ending the war.
No plan. At all.
He details this vacillation. One day it's a ceasefire, the next maybe a big settlement. Sometimes it's even threats to just pull out completely.
So, inconsistency.
Massive inconsistency. And a lack of real leverage. Kimmage points out the U.S. struggles to find leverage over Russia, partly because it's already rejected things like more sanctions or military aid, forms of escalation. And it struggles with Ukraine, too. Not because Kyiv isn't grateful, but because, well, Ukraine is fighting for its life and has support from other places besides Washington.
So they have other options.
They do. Yet Trump insists he's the peacemaker. And Kimmage puts it starkly. The international public is asked to admire his non-existent plan, just like those invisible clothes.
Wow. So the first big takeaway from Kimmage is grand claims, but maybe no actual concrete strategy underneath. Performance over plan.
That's the essence of the comparison, yeah.
Okay, so if the plan is, as Kimmage says, non-existent, like the clothes, why isn't anyone shouting it? Like the child in the story. Why are Moscow, Kiev, Europe, why are they seemingly playing along?
That's a great question. And Kimmage really digs into the diplomatic calculations here. It's fascinating. He breaks down why these major players are hesitant to call out Emperor Trump.
Okay, let's start with Moscow. Why are they quiet?
From Russia's perspective, Kimmage suggests it's pretty straightforward strategy. They simply do not want to upset a president more sympathetic to Russia than any before, and likely any in the future.
Ah, okay. So don't rock the boat if the potential outcome looks favorable.
Exactly. Why risk losing potential gains like, say, a smaller U.S. military presence in Europe, or maybe looser sanctions down the line? It's calculated silence.
Makes sense from their view. But what about Ukraine? They're literally fighting for survival. You'd think they'd run a real plan more than anyone.
Kyiv's situation is incredibly difficult, almost impossible. Kimmage explains they do not want to incur Trump's wrath. They're terrified he could set back Ukraine's war effort by abandoning it.
So fear of losing that critical U.S. support.
Absolutely. Kimmage mentions a specific meeting back in February where Zelensky apparently came perilously close to telling Trump he was delusional about his peace ideas.
Wow.
But then, later, publicly, he's praising Trump's generosity and probity. It's this tightrope walk. driven by pure existential need.
A very delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
In Europe, why are they reluctant?
For Europe, it's about not wanting to alienate the leader of a country that underpins its security, especially when the war's outcome is still so unclear and Russia is undeniably a bona fide adversary.
So they're caught, too.
They're caught. They might see the spectacle, but they feel they can't afford to challenge it because they need that underlying security alliance, however awkward it feels right now.
Okay, so the second insight here is really about this web of strategic silence. Moscow, Kiev, Europe. They all have their reasons, their vulnerabilities, that keep them from publicly questioning the emperor's diplomatic attire.
Precisely. It's a complex interplay of dependencies and calculations.
Kimmage calls it a spectacle of sycophancy, which sounds almost darkly funny. But then he says the real-world implications are dead serious. He uses that word, pernicious. So what are these harmful effects? Who's actually benefiting from this spectacle and who's paying the price?
Yeah, he's very clear on this. He states this diplomatic show will not only fail to stop Russia's war, it will complicate the job of sustaining and strengthening Ukraine's capacity to fight.
So it actively hurts Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
That's the argument. And if you look at who benefits, Kimmage points directly at Russia. Trump's muddled and inconsistent messaging isn't just confusing, it actively helps Moscow. It allows Russia to obscure its intentions, Kimmage says. Lets them play for time. It makes their aggressive actions in Ukraine maybe seem more modest or even defensive than they really are.
It's like a smokescreen.
Exactly. A strategic gift, really. Russia can just keep going, prosecuting the war, while this diplomatic theater kind of distracts everyone.
That's grim.
And Kimmage adds that any talk from Trump about a reduced American military footprint in Europe, that fits perfectly with Moscow's long-term goals of weakening NATO.
Right.
Plus, Russia is happy to flatter Trump to play along with a consummate peacemaker image if it serves them. Kimmage points to that meeting in Alaska, August 2025. He calls it a gift to Putin.
A gift, even while Russia was attacking civilians.
Yes. Kimmage suggests it implied the U.S. was realizing Russia understands more than just force, even amidst those attacks, and Trump's knack for dominating news cycles. Kimmage argues that actually helps Russia globally, lets them frame their narrative.
Wow. Okay, so Russia benefits. What about the impact on Ukraine and Europe, the ones directly affected or reliant on alliances?
For them, Kimmage argues, it creates really dangerous distractions. He says European leaders are not naive about what's happening. They see the hollowness.
But they're stuck.
They're stuck in what Kimmage calls a humiliating position of relying on the United States.
Right.
And this forces them to defer to Trump, who relishes their deference.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. And it leads them, Kimmage says, to adopt bits and pieces of Trump's wishful thinking, which then stops them from being totally honest with their own people about the war's harsh realities.
So they end up playing along with a narrative they don't fully buy?
That seems to be the implication.
Yeah.
And this rapid-fire improvisational and utopian diplomacy, as Kimmage calls it, messes with the serious long-term work needed, like building up European defense, aligning support for Ukraine.
Right, the practical stuff.
Exactly. It makes people think maybe the war will just vanish magically. Instead of focusing on crucial aid for Kiev, drones, manpower, air defense's attention gets pulled towards speculating about land swaps or vague security guarantees that might be fantasies. And Kimmage drops a real bombshell detail here. Just 5 days before that Alaska meeting between Trump and Putin, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance declared that his country is done with the funding of the Ukraine war business.
Wow. That completely undercuts the diplomatic performance, doesn't it?
It lays bare the potential reality behind the show. So the third key point from Kimmage. This spectacle isn't just harmless theater. It's pernicious. It helps Russia, buys them time, obscures their actions, while distracting and hindering Ukraine and Europe.
A really damaging dynamic. Yeah, that Vance quote really hits hard. It highlights the potential gap between the diplomatic show and actual policy. So, if this is helping Russia and hindering allies, what's the ultimate cost for the U.S. itself, for its global standing, its influence?
Kimmage argues the ultimate cost is paid in the currency of American power. He draws this really important contrast with America's past role.
How so?
He reminds us of Washington's rich history of peacemaking in Europe. Wilson at Versailles after World War I, FDR and Truman setting up NATO after World War II.
Right, Reagan and Bush ending the Cold War.
Exactly. These weren't just diplomatic wins. They established post-war Europe as Kimmage says, a crown of American foreign policy. They showed sustained, principled leadership. And Kimmage argues Trump's approach is actively tarnishing that legacy.
So it's bigger than just this conflict. It's about chipping away at decades, maybe a century, of built-up diplomatic trust and capital.
That's the core concern. And Kimmage explains why this approach is so damaging to that influence. He says Trump's processes are too chaotic, his words too riddled with falsehoods, his policy changes too abrupt.
Making it hard for other countries to rely on the U.S.
Exactly. Foreign leaders just can't build genuine trust. And Kimmage stresses, without trust, there is no persuasion and no genuine cooperation. Without trust, alliances lose their validity.
That's fundamental.
It is. The worry Kimmage voices is that if Washington's trustworthiness becomes a fully spent commodity, the U.S. might only be left with the limited tool of hard power.
Oof. Losing that soft power, that ability to lead through alliances and persuasion.
It would be a massive shift, potentially isolating the U.S. and shrinking its diplomatic toolkit dramatically.
So the fourth major insight. The spectacle isn't just about Ukraine. It's eroding American credibility long-term, potentially leaving the U.S. reliant only on force, not influence.
A stark warning about the potential long-term consequences.
Okay, that's a pretty worrying picture of declining U.S. influence. But Kimmage does try to offer a bit of balance, right? He asks if there are any positives, any virtues at all to this. Well, this madcap style, as he sometimes calls it.
Yeah, he does try to be balanced. He acknowledges that this unconventional approach is not categorically unworkable. It's not always bad.
Okay.
He suggests it can sometimes embody flexibility and a salutary indifference to dogma. Basically, a willingness to ignore rigid traditions, which can sometimes be good.
Can you give an example?
He points to how Trump's approach helped broker a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The argument is that sometimes shaking things up, ignoring the usual diplomatic rulebook, can actually break through log jams where traditional methods failed.
Ah, okay. So in certain situations, that disruptive style might actually achieve something, but not in Ukraine.
That's Kimmage's conclusion. He says specifically in Ukraine, where many powers intersect and some collide, Trump's limitations really come to the fore. They become all too apparent.
So the complexity matters.
Hugely. Kimmage clarifies. Trump's convening power may be formidable. He can get everyone's attention, bring the world to him. No doubt about that.
Right, he dominates headlines.
But Kimmage argues his problem-solving power isn't nearly as strong. He can gather the players, but he struggles to actually resolve the deep-seated issues between them.
Got it.
And he circles right back to the emperor metaphor at the end. He says Trump's hunger for praise is a vulnerability, highlighting rather than hiding the space between rhetoric and reality.
Just like the emperor whose vanity made his lack of clothes obvious.
Exactly. That gap between the talk and the actual results becomes glaringly visible, according to Kimmage.
So the final insight. While the unconventional style can have niche successes due to its flexibility, it falls short in complex, multi-layered crises like Ukraine. The power to command attention doesn't translate into the power to solve the problem, leaving that gap between performance and reality wide open.
A powerful concluding thought from Kimmage.
And before we wrap up, let's not forget our producer, FireflyHaku, the absolute mastermind, who somehow takes our, sometimes messy dives and makes them sound halfway professional.
Couldn't do it without them.
Truly. Grateful for your ears. Spread the word you found this valuable, and join us again soon for another deep dive.